How do board games, journalism, AI, and content marketing go together? And is there any more room there for creative writing? That's what I try to find out with my guest in this episode. Hi, welcome to Storyline Sessions. My name is Marco, and this time I had the pleasure of hosting Eric R. Burgess. He's a versatile writer, a host of an award-winning podcast, Board Game Babylon, and the chief product officer at SciML. It's a company that combines psychology, neuroscience, and AI. We talked about his passion for board games, his 2 upcoming books, using AI as a tool in writing, his days at Disney as a writer for games such as Who Wants to Be a Millionaire, and many more interesting topics. You can find links to the books that we mentioned and everything else in the description. Let's dive into this week's storyline session with Eric R. Burgess. Enjoy! Hi Eric, thank you for coming to Storyline Sessions. How are you?
I'm doing very well, thank you, Marco. I hope you're doing well too.
Doing well. There's a storm brewing, but hopefully we'll manage to have a conversation before it hits us. So.
Oh, okay. I'm in Southern California, so we don't really understand weather. So
can't relate.
No, sorry.
Yeah, well, I think that let's get the elephant out of the room. Those board games, the majestic collection behind you. You
Yes.
were talking about working on 2 books, no less, about board games. So could you maybe start from there?
Sure. Well, as the background probably suggests, I'm pretty into books and board games. This is my version of a man cave. I always say to people, and board games have been part of my life. From just really the beginning. I was part of a card playing family as a young person, and for me, it was about family. It was about gathering. Was what board games were about, and spending time with people. Family would come from out of town, and what would we end up doing? Inevitably, it was playing some card games or a board game or something. And so for me, I've always had that association with, I think, just spending time with people you like and love, and getting to, in casual conversation over the table, not like a chess game where, it's very intense, but actually just an opportunity to be able to, spend time and talk with people. And so having spent, most of my life with this, I decided to do a little writing on the subject because I am a writer before anything else. And I really wanted to write a book that was focused on sort of the things I've learned from board games that I apply to my normal life, because I think they've had a positive impact on me, and I think that a lot of times it's inspired me to do things, I think, in a more ordered fashion. Because when you do in a board game, you learn the rules, and then you have to sort of stick to the rules, and you have to, you have goals. But as one of my favorite game designers, Reiner Knizia would say, winning is a goal, but it's the goal that's important, not the winning. And so I think that if you have that sort of idea of striving for something, but it's not about, crushing your enemies, it's more about saying, how can I do well? I think that applies to life very effectively too. And I've always, I think, taken that into the business world for sure. I am somebody that goes in with I think a very cooperative way of thinking about working, trying to help, sort of everyone, kind of all boats be lifted by the tide, so to speak. And so I decided I would write this book that I call Optional Rules, which is variants for life that I've learned from board games. And I wrote this book while, spending time with the London Writers Salon, which we both been part of, and it's a wonderful thing about developing a habit of just showing up every single day to do some writing, and inevitably the habit of that is what gets you through. That's I think I'm paraphrasing a quote from the great Octavia Butler, one of my favorite writers. It's like, forget inspiration, habit will get you through. And I believe that's been true to me. But when I did write the book, I wrote it, I think, with a lot of autobiography. Ostensibly, it was meant to be a memoir specifically focused on saying, here's some wonderful things with research to back it up. But I ended up writing lots of stories that I just enjoy telling about board games, because having been deeply in the hobby for years, having been on a podcast, having done a podcast for many years too, I've gotten to know lots of game designers and publishers, and so I write reviews, and I've been very heavily involved in the industry, do a little design myself, and there's just some fun stories that don't necessarily align with a memoir, and so the editor that I hired, a wonderful woman named Chris Zerbel, she kind of reminded me of that. She said, memoir and autobiography are different things. And so I'm now in the process of essentially rewriting the book with a focus on it just being the memoir. And then I'm taking all those enjoyable stories about getting on planes to go play with game designers and learning how to develop games from wonderful people that do this for a living. And I'm turning that into a separate book of stories that'll be more focused, I think, for people that love board games. Whereas I think the other book, the memoir, Optional Rules, I think has a general audience, kind of target. And I think it's a shorter book in its second form. It is, I think it's definitely more focused, and I just don't have to feel like I'm kind of killing my darlings, as they say, because I know that those stories are going to go to another place, which I'll get back to at some point in time. So.
Yeah, it sounds interesting, but I think that what you mentioned, killing your darlings, I guess that working with an editor and separating it into two books instead of just writing it all off was much easier of a process.
Oh, absolutely. Well, it's always wonderful to have somebody who's, she was paid, but, somebody who's willing to go through the entire book and take it very seriously. She did what she called a big picture edit, in that she was thinking about, because I told her, I said I was thinking about the audience. My original thought on this, the audience would be that it would be fairly narrow, and it would be people probably that were interested in board games, until I spoke to more and more people that kept saying, well, I'm kind of interested in that. That sounds like an interesting memoir, and I happen to work with a company that does a lot of research, because we're kind of a research as a service organization. We're called SciML, Psychology Machine Learning. I know it's a terrible name, but what can we do? And so since I have access to neuroscientists and I have access to all the psychology background, I do want to bring in research to let people know that, for example, one of the things that gives us stress every day is the number of decisions we make, even if it's a decision about the kind of the clothes you're going to wear in the morning. Every single decision piles on a little more stress on the load that you have on you. This is one of the reasons why I have essentially a uniform that I wear. Now that I work from home, I just put on a black t-shirt and the same thing all the time. And it's quite nice because in the morning now I have sort of freedom to be able to think about other things because I don't think about what it is I'm going to wear. This is, common for a lot of people that are a lot smarter than me doing that. And so I've quite enjoyed that experience. But what I suppose in the book, and that I'm gathering some research on, is because when you play board games, you make so many decisions over the course of a game, you actually are strengthening your skills there, and therefore you put less stress on yourself every day when you're making decisions in your normal life. So I'm making sure that there's some scientific heft behind that. I'm looking at research on the subject and actually talking to a couple of researchers that have been looking into this matter. But it's a natural thing because I have always had a total comfort level with deciding things. I joke around a little bit about, when George W. Bush was president, he would call himself the decider. And I was like, well, I don't know if I liked that so much because I wasn't convinced this was the most thoughtful person around. But I do think there's a lot of value in making decisions. And I think that's why I've always been in leadership roles for everywhere I've ever worked. They've always been put into a leadership position fairly quickly, even sometimes without me trying, because of the fact that I can speak very decisively about things. Because what do you do in board games? You have to figure out what to be able to do, and you have to make constant decisions. Am I doing this or that? And modern board games are very focused on that kind of stuff. It's decisions, it's negotiations, it's auctions, it's a lot of interaction, rather than what I think in the U.S. at least we think of board games as being for children. We think of them as being very random because a lot of the sort of popular board games of the past have been really kind of focused on that kind of thing. Chutes and Ladders it's not even really a game. You just roll dice and whatever happens, happens. And even the so-called game of life is very random. And with only very occasional decisions. And I thought, oh my gosh, what a terrible message to send to children, that the game of life is totally random, and you don't get much chance to have an impact on what you're going to do. That's not true at all. So I think I think we get a lot from this experience of play that we can bring into our educational life, that we can bring into our work life. In fact, I think one of the strengths we can have is when we look at those sort of three aspects of life, and we find where there's strengths that you can build and strategies you can develop that actually that are transferable. And I find that to be very effective. I think at those intersections of life, we're very strong. Again, when play can inform work, when play can inform education, it can be very powerful. That's gamification in some ways. That's how we do that a lot of times. And if we find things in work that make sense in play, there's actually some value there too. I've learned things from, studying for an MBA that have helped me with some board games I play, because, it's, some of them are fairly deep economic games. But I hate to also give people the impression that all I play is these very strategic, long games. Modern board games, one of the beautiful things about them, I think, is that they're shorter. They actually take into account the fact that we have these shorter attention spans than we used to have. We have too many things going on. We have so much information coming at us, and so a lot of them really are played in 45 minutes. They have 2 to 4 pages of rules, and it's not complicated to learn them, but it's about developing the strategy and figuring out the games as you go. So, as they say, easy to learn, challenging to master, perhaps. But you should be able to get into these things fairly easily, and I just always want to make sure people are not intimidated by the idea they think that it's going to be work, that it's going to be too much. Quite the reverse. I think it's the antidote for too much screen time, which I think we all experience these days. Let's take a little of that Black Mirror time away, and let's instead turn it into something where you're actually looking at human faces, talking to people, reacting to people, and remembering what even responses are like. One of the best things I think about the advent of video is we can get nonverbal cues again, which you absolutely can't get off of when we used to all have to do conference calls, which was just a phone call. At least in video, it's a little better, but I'll still take a actual sitting at a table with people over even an online call. Although in the example here, it's great because we can talk across the world, which is wonderful. But if I had you here, I'd be even happier. Like we were sitting in the other room, and inevitably I'd be talking you into a board game. So yeah.
Yeah, and that's really interesting when you mention it, the evolution of games. One thing is that the people have looked at them as silly children stuff, and then they've kind of evolved to more elaborate things, tactical, story-driven things, things that need to take time to be explained to people, and then to master it you need months and months. And on the other hand, there is also a thing that we've been inclined to go towards technology, as you said, the Black Mirror thing. And it's kind of interesting that aside from that, we've still managed to improve on the games and make them more prominent. I think that the games have undergone an evolution that's really noticeable in the last, let's say, a decade, maybe even more, but especially the last couple of years, the number of games coming out and the interest of the people, the communities that have built around them, the YouTube scene of the people playing games, even streaming them, that's quite interesting when you notice people saying, nobody has attention anymore, people are only on TikTok, but there is quite a jump in people playing games. So I think that's something that's really interesting and ties into what you said.
It does. I mean, to a certain extent, the pandemic had a little bit of a positive impact. I know it had an impact on the sales of board games and tabletop games and role-playing games and stuff like that. That was inevitable. I joked with people, people said I had, too many games in my house, but who's laughing now? I had plenty to do. And in fact, the funniest part about this is I actually invested in some solo board games because I thought that, I obviously couldn't have my friends around. And so I thought that was something I was going to spend my time with. But quite the reverse, my wife and son and daughter were more interested in playing board games. And so I really did get a chance to play any solo games because they were actually more interested because, well, obviously we couldn't go out as much and couldn't have other people over. So it became another thing, kind of a second wave of board game interest in our family. Kind of when the kids were young, they knew the best way to get dad's attention was to, play a board game. But now it was just an opportunity for us to get together again. So I do think it's a reaction. I do think people feel like they need to do something real, and going out and about, of course, is wonderful. You want to get people back out in the world. I know that I think I read something that said something like 20% of people, at least in the U.S., are not really coming back into the world the way they were before. The pandemic has fundamentally changed the way people are sort of doing things now. And so if they do need something at home that isn't going to be digital, get out a board game rather than just watching Netflix over and over again, or hours and hours on TikTok. I do think it's a positive thing. I do think it helps us develop skills, and I do think it helps us with just an excuse to spend that time with other people. I think it's a really, really positive thing. So.
Yeah, and when you think about it, people talking about games being childish and stuff like that, and often being just separate, both board games, video games, they're kind of a thing that's for most people who aren't into games and who are just superficial. They're like, okay, this is the fun part when we can do it in our spare time, but let's get down to business. There's no place here for games. And I think that you kind of proved that that's not the case, really. And you mentioned gamification, which is an interesting thing for me. Could you elaborate a bit for people who aren't that familiar with the term? And I think that's really something that translates well with the things you're writing now.
Sure. Because I've done a lot of this kind of design work for companies I've worked with too. Gamification is really just trying to take, for the most part, a lot of things that are in video games that encourage the player along and actually applying them to business software or even consumer software where you're just trying to get them more interested in doing things. So in the video game world, this is like achievements and badges that you'll get for being able to accomplish a certain thing. Maybe the game overall is about a long RPG experience of going and doing all these things, but along the way, it encourages you along by saying, here's a badge for collecting enough of this thing, or, here's a thing for exploring enough space. It's just some kind of action. And it can be, it's in everything from, the Farmvilles of old, to, more advanced games and massively multiplayer games. They all have, a lot of them have, most of them have achievements that you can get. And it's nice. It encourages things along. It encourages people to explore the game. It can drive adoption really effectively because it's like maybe if you go into a game world and you're not exactly sure what to do, it pushes you along a little bit. One of the best books I think to read on the subject is called Reality is Broken. Jane McGonigal, fantastic writer on thinker on this subject, who's really gamifies her own life quite effectively too, even in some in some case, in one case very specifically for her recovery from a brain injury. She used a lot of kind of gamified tools to be able to get her to, hey, just drink enough water, hey, just get further along on this, this path of recovery. So you see it now even in, like I have an Apple Watch. The Apple Watch tries to get me to close a loop every day for a certain amount of activity, for example. Or Duolingo, which is a great way, I think a great app for teaching language, will encourage you with bonuses. Say, hey, if you take, you do 3 lessons today, you get an achievement for, getting into this next league. And, there's all kinds of ways in which it gives you these little rewards that just pull you along the path. And it can be very helpful, I think, for a lot of applications to put this in so that people can understand how far along they are. Even as something as simple as like LinkedIn used to have a thing where it say, hey, your profile is only 71% complete. Don't you want to get to 100%? Don't you want to close loop on this? And it would encourage you to be able to add more data, which of course is valuable for them, but also it's good for making some kind of connections, for building up the network effect of their organization. So that's really kind of what it is. Just a side note on that, I sort of joke that, Minecraft kind of broke that a little bit. I used to say that Minecraft was the life-ification of board games or of games because it's so open and it doesn't necessarily, originally it was more open. I think maybe now they've added a little bit more to it, but it was so open and you had to figure out your own thing to do. You had to do I want to build a castle? Do I want to dig out a canyon? What do I want to do? I thought it was an interesting thing, but it definitely played havoc with the idea of driving people forward with specific things to do. Instead, I think it was tapping into your creativity is going to be the thing that's going to drive you forward. And I think both of those are very powerful ways to motivate people. Just not everybody is as creative as that. So maybe Minecraft wasn't going to work for everybody in the same way. So.
Yeah, I guess that ties into somewhat of a trend. I've noticed people talking about games on YouTube who are talking about the world's constantly expanding. We had games that were quite simple, both in a technical way and the story time. And when you think about it, people wanted more and more from games. People wanted worlds that were expansive, things that were 3D, and then when you can go explore each building you come across. And when you think about the games, the games that have come out recently, who the designers went all across the world and populated each town, each building, everything you can go to, and somewhat people look, let's say, disinterested now in those games. Not all, of course, they are selling quite well, but I think there's a counterpoint to that where people are looking for more focused, concentrated experiences that are based either on a story or an exact mechanic that you can go through in a day or a couple of days. And I think that's something that maybe we've reached dead end on that. Okay, Minecraft gives you possibility to do a lot of things, and then you have games that are so expansive that people maybe just lose interest on them.
It's an interesting development there, and it has echoes in the tabletop space as well. Certainly the modern kind of renaissance of board games in the U.S. kicked off in 1995 with what was then called Settlers of Catan. Nowadays they call it Catan because Settlers has a colonial feel, I suppose, and we want to wipe away those things when we can, and that's fine. But when that game hit here in the U.S., I mean, it brought a huge bunch. And for me, I was playing Magic the Gathering at the time, killed Magic the Gathering, and we were playing Catan 3 times a night. But what it brought was, I think, a modern sort of feel of these games that are more like a lot of resource management, and they were thoughtful. They were interesting, but they were in many ways very puzzly. And I think what we've seen now after maybe about 10 years or so of that sort of thing is games got a little more complicated. They started to bring in more of what we would call American Chrome, where there was just a lot more detail to them. And now they've gotten into this story space in a really powerful way, wherein there's lots of times where you have story elements of the games that are either potentially a single play experience, where they go, it's like, hey, you're going to play through this one time, and what they call legacy games, where the first legacy game, I think, was Risk Legacy, where, you played a traditional game of Risk, which most people have tried at one point, but instead of the board being fixed and static, it would be affected by one of your games. And so, the national lines would change and stuff like that because of what you've done, and you would get to rename a continent after yourself or your wife or whatever. And so the world would evolve, in an interesting way, and then you'd play a series, kind of a campaign of games in which it would change. Risk itself is not a great game, but then they applied that to games like Pandemic, which is a lovely cooperative game, which even before we had an actual pandemic, that was a more popular game. I don't know, maybe it got more popular actually after too, but it was a really interesting experience because you saw how things progressed over time. And now you have a lot of games where you may play very sensible, regular, traditional board game mechanics for a while, but then you go into the story mode where you're going to read something and you're going to get to make a decision, almost like a choose your own adventure kind of experience, and or a little bit of a role-playing experience. And it gives you an opportunity to be able to make some decisions that have that story-driven element, which then can come back on you later on based on what you've done. I think it's a really interesting thing. And just a side note to that, role-playing games, which I played when I was in high school and was a big fan, but we kind of stopped. I stopped for about 30 years and never played any role-playing games at all for a long time until my son kind of insisted that he wanted to play Dungeons and Dragons. And so when he was about 16, I said, okay, I guess we'll play. And I started to learn a little bit more about the fact that the role-playing world had developed as well when I was not around. And it got to this more storytelling, this more collaborative storytelling experience, as opposed to traditional Dungeons and Dragons, which if people aren't familiar, you have one person kind of telling the story and everybody else is kind of participating in it, but they're kind of in control of the world. I think a lot of more modern games now have a more collaborative effort where other people that are playing can bring in their elements as well. And it gives them a chance to engage their creativity and be part of the actual kind of development of this sort of game world and everything like that. And even that's extended now to what they call solo RPG games, which are really journaling games, which are, it gives you some prompts and you can write to be able to accomplish certain goals. And it can just, for people like you and me who are just writers, these feel like writing prompts. They feel like extended writing prompts. But there's points at which you might have a question of whether something happens, and what you do is you either roll dice, you draw a card from a traditional or maybe a tarot deck or something like that, what they call like an oracle, to be able to give you a little sense of where to go with the story, and then you continue to write. So I think it's just fascinating to me that it's gotten more creative, that it's gotten more story-driven, because stories have a powerful impact on us. We remember stories really, really well. It's one way in which we can actually, I think it's a touchstone for us to be able to remember things. That's why we tell stories this way. We are storytelling creatures, like by nature, I think. And that gives us just a way to be able to remember things really a lot of times. So it's not surprising to me. I think that storytelling has gotten more powerful, and my hope is that as we get into the world of AI, where people are using, artificial tools, that they will use them as tools to do storytelling, but they won't try to replace, creative people with storytelling tools, because that's what they are. They're tools. They're not solutions. So.
Yeah, I agree. And could you tell us a bit how you've implemented AI in your work, whether it be professional day-to-day stuff or maybe you're writing for your books?
I do. I obviously working in machine learning and artificial intelligence. Naturally, I'm pretty heavy into the AI tools that are out there, and I've been since ChatGPT launched. I've been pretty involved with it and use it every single day. What I find though is it's quite good for doing some of the boring work. So it's quite good for the scaffolding of things. So when I do write an article, sometimes I will ask ChatGPT or Notion AI or one of the other tools out there. Claude, I think, is actually probably maybe my favorite now of the tools that are out there. But I will ask it to write the article that I might want to write, but I will totally rewrite it afterwards. But what it will do sometimes is it will give me, again, the scaffolding of an article of what I can think about, and I'll inevitably wipe out these things. I'll rewrite it. But it's useful for doing just that organization of things, which is something I would used to have to do, because I would always outline everything beforehand. And now it's really just taking my outlining portion, kind of helping me with outlining. I don't think that its output is very strong in general. I think they're pretty bad at coming up with creative ideas. And anytime I've ever seen something where I've said, oh, that's a nice phrase, I would go to Google and I would grab that phrase and I'd inevitably find it somewhere else. So that feels like plagiarism to me, if I found, somebody else wrote that nice phrase about this board game or whatever else, I'm not going to reproduce that in my article, that would be terrible. So I end up rewriting everything. So I think it's they're very useful for that. For creative writing, it's good for inspiration. One of my friends, Vivian Mildenberger, who is a brilliant, wonderful artist who illustrates children's books. Vivian was one of the people I talked about this, I think, with her earliest. She said, oh yeah, I'm using Midjourney, and she was using Stable Diffusion and everything like that. She said, for sketching. And so she would put a description in and she'd say, this is what I want to draw. And then she would get these outputs, and then she'd go, oh, okay, great. Now I have a little sense of things, and now I'll go paint the real painting. So for that purpose, for some of the stuff that's the process of getting to where it is that you're writing, it can be helpful. But I think there's a fundamental difference between some writers. There's the writers who like to have written, and there's the writers who actually enjoy writing. And sometimes maybe you switch between them because maybe you're exhausted from writing and you go, gosh, I just wish this was done. But I think that for people that just want to get something out the door, they're going to probably lean on these tools more, and I think they're going to end up with work that they're not going to be very proud of. I think for writers who actually enjoy writing, which I would definitely put myself in that category, I love to write. I enjoy it. When you get a phrase out that you just are happy about, or a piece goes out and you go, wow, I really, a little pat on the back, that sounded pretty good. That's about as wonderful a joy as I've experienced, except maybe, time with my children and my wife. I mean, that is such a golden feel. I wouldn't want to lose that, by letting an AI write everything for me. So it's really good for, suggestions and for ideas. I think for, just throwing up, thoughts on these things. But like the novel, I've written another novel that is about my early days calling bulletin board systems before the internet. So, back in the late 80s, we really didn't have access to the World Wide Web, or anything like that in those days. And so you'd call people's bulletin board systems that were on their computers at home. And that was an interesting time because while we would post things on really just these forums, these bulletin boards that really had nothing but text, the great experience was meeting these people every month. We'd have a meeting where we'd get together ostensibly to trade computer games because we were all a bunch of hackers in those days. But really it was a social experience, and we got to know people. And so I think we understood something at that moment in time that we've lost a little bit, which is this digital world is a beautiful way to bring people together, for you to find your tribe, to be able to find people with similar interests. But then you need to stop. And then you need to go actually spend the time physically if you can, So it's like, make the connections, but don't just only have a fully digital relationship. I think it's, the reason I developed these people as friends and still am friends with some of them now, decades later, is because of the time we spent together. And so I think it is challenging nowadays. I don't have a perfect solution for anybody, but I do think one of them is just don't let every relationship be fully digital. At some point you got to go actually talk to the people, see them in 3D, in IRL, so to speak, and actually spend time with people. And I think that's where we develop really strong relationships rather than it being just about these purely digital experiences. And so that book I will get back to at one point. I did write it at the London Writers' Salon as well, but it's on the list after the other two. I got to go back and edit it. I do think it's healthy to write something and then spend some time away from it and then come back later on, and I think you have a new perspective. So
yeah. But the first draft is done.
The first draft is done, yes, which was very satisfying to get to the end of. It's one of those stories that's told over the course of like a long weekend. And so that was there was an urgency to it, which was sort of nice to sort of get it out there. I could see it turning into a film. I don't write screenplays. I don't think it's for me. But I could see it being a film, one of those films that sort of has that sort of short time frame and everything like that. We'll see. I don't know if anybody's interested in about that time, but I do also think that there's a story, there's a message there, I think, that is useful for us in the modern day. I think it's like about that connecting with people, but then, develop out those relationships. I think is a helpful thing for us. So.
Yeah, I think that sounds relevant even more so than maybe when you wrote it first time. I think that's, yeah. And when you think about the communities, the building, and even those bullet boards, they've kind of evolved into, on one side you have things like Reddit, which is still something that's like live and well, but on the other hand you have Discords and people who are building communities, maybe first off, I don't know, YouTube or some other social media, but then bringing people together on Discord. And I think that is maybe something that's like an evolution of that. And even some of those AI tools are based on Discord, where people basically create things together. So that's interesting as well.
Oh, absolutely. And I hey, I'm a technophile for sure. I mean, I do think that all these wonderful ways in which we get together is great, and I would never want to turn back the clock. But at the same time, I think that we just need to be careful about feeling like it's a fully digital experience. And in a way, the pandemic sort of pushed us further along that path. Because obviously we had no choice, for a little while, and depending on, of course, where you were living. But I mean, here we were in California, we were definitely locked down, and I think it just, the good news is it made remote work more of a possibility, which gives a lot of people, I think, wonderful flexibility in their life. I mean, as they say, a crisis is a terrible thing to waste, and that's one good thing that happened out of this. Is it said, hey, work from home is really a possibility, helps people's lives, help them recapture some of their lives. I think, I myself, I don't think I'd ever work at a place I had to go 5 days a week in again. If I ever leave my company, which seems unlikely to me. I don't think I'd ever work for another company that I had to go in all the time. It's just not worth it to me any longer. But the flip side of that is I'm an old guy, and I do think that younger folks, they're going to benefit from going into these offices, and so I don't want them to be. I'm hopeful. I'm hopeful that people will still go in, because that's where you develop those relationships. That's where you're going to meet the person. It's going to become your best friend. Meet the person that maybe you get romantically involved with. You learn things from the people you're around. I think there's just lots of opportunity, and so I don't think in the office is dead, but I do think that it's something that just makes more sense for a younger audience than me, because I've already got a massive network. I got somebody to call for just about everything I can imagine. I do work as an advisor for a lot of companies, and I don't mind going in when there's an opportunity to be able to help out some folks, because one of my goals is to always try to be supportive of people that are starting great new things, because I received plenty of support over the years from people that helped me out, and so that's why I love to help others. But I can't see ever going back in regularly. I love being home too much, and I love my cat forcing me to take a break, because she comes in and demands that I take a cat break and spend some time petting the cat, which is wonderful for stress reduction and everything like that, and I think, I just honestly, I feel badly. The cats will probably be fine. I feel badly for all those dogs that got used to having their masters at home, or their owners or their guardians or whatever you want to call them at home, and these poor dogs, suddenly one day it's like everybody goes back to work. What do they think happened? It's just got to be a terrible thing.
Yeah, I mean, that's an idea for a short story from a perspective of a dog who thinks that rapture has happened.
Yeah, exactly. There you go.
And well, you've switched to working from home most of the time, and when you think about the stuff you've done before and the work you've written mostly, and do you have did you have a change in your working schedule? Did you have, let's say, a ritual that maybe developed during the pandemic, and did it change the way you work and approach writing?
Well, for sure, London Writers Salon was a large part of that. I found them pretty early on in the pandemic. I don't remember how, maybe on Twitter or something like that. Somebody may have said something. But that concept of just being able to sit, wake up every morning and go in and at 8 a.m., local time, spending 50 focused minutes of time writing was very, very helpful to me. I've already in my life, I've written as a journalist, as a brand journalist. So I've had a lot of times that I've had to deal with deadlines and what have you. But something about just getting that back into that habit of every single day you have writing happening was very, very positive for me, because even though I was spending that time working on my own work, the second that I was done with that, and I would then shift in, at 9 a.m., I'd shift back to, the work I was doing for the day, I found I was more ready. Because I felt like I had accomplished something personally, which makes me feel good. I had, added pages to my memoir or to a book or, to a novel or something that I felt like was important to me. And so then shifting gears to something that was instead, because I'm a software producer and marketer, shifting gears to the work of the day that, is paying the bills just felt fine, and I already was in a mindset of working. I was in a mindset of saying, how do I make good use of this time? I am a little bit of a productivity wonk. I do like to use Pomodoro technique, 20 minutes of focused work and then 5 minutes of a break, 20 minutes, I do like to use that kind of tool to be able to drive my work day. And I think it's actually very healthy. But I felt better about actually getting this work done, and it kept me on a schedule, because then I knew if I got enough accomplished from, say 9 a.m. to noon, then I would have lunch at noon, and then I would join at 1 o'clock in the afternoon. I would join I guess it's the New Zealand 8 a.m. hour with London Writer Salon, and I would then get another hour of writing if I had a really productive, 9 to 12. I didn't necessarily, sometimes I'd still join, but I would work on my day job, and I would write a product requirement document or a marketing document, whatever it is. But just having that structure kept me going, I think, really effectively. And then, I'd finish at 2, and then I'd maybe from 2 to 5, then I would have another sort of 3-hour block of time when I would be working on my day job in 20-minute, sort of Pomodoro sessions. And I just would get so much done. It was glorious. And I never, ever had this kind of level of productivity when I was in the office, because I was always in leadership roles in companies, and inevitably people come in, they ask questions, they need some guidance. Hey, no problem if you needed help with something. But a lot of times people come in and be like, such and such a person said blah, blah, blah. And it's like, okay, so now I'm dealing with the HR side of things. And it's like, I don't mind doing that sometimes, but it would be frequent, because they want to talk to their boss. Somebody said something that offended them or whatever it is. And that was not my favorite part of the job. I like to get things accomplished, but you have to do that. You have to give people time. You have to let them, voice things. And that would cut into my time to get things accomplished. So for me, during the pandemic, professionally, these were some of the happiest years of my life, because I produced so many products. I produced so many articles. I did so much writing. I just had an incredibly productive time. And, I hate to get too excited about that, because I know that obviously people were suffering and, the world was going through this horrible thing. But again, where can you find the pockets of positive things that come out of a really challenging experience? And for me, professionally, those were some of my favorite years of my life, because I was able to get so much accomplished. And I still did work with a variety of different people. But I mean, I've had people now that I've worked with for 4 years, 5 years. I haven't met them in person. I just know them. I just know 2D versions of them. One of the companies I work with, Neon ID, the founder, she lives in Brooklyn. And 2 or 3 times I've almost been over in New York, and then she was in San Diego, and, not too far from me here in California. We just never connected. And I find it so insane that I have never physically been in the same room with this person who I've spent an enormous amount of time helping build a business with, and who I consider a good friend, and, whose family I've seen evolve or have a child, and, all this stuff. It's really odd, but also it transcends the digital relationship too, because, somehow we've gotten there. Even so, I think it works on a business level. It sort of works on a friendship level. I don't think it would ever work on a romantic level, though. I think there's where I draw the line. But, maybe I'm too traditional in that sort of thinking about things, because I've been with the same woman since 1992. So,
Wow.
So, and still very happily married. So, yeah, maybe I'm not a good example, because I just got stupid lucky finding the most wonderful person who's a beautiful compliment to me. So,
well, that's awesome, but you did the work. I mean, that's nothing. Maybe if you were lucky to meet her, but You certainly did the work to keep her.
Oh yeah, no, I always say, the biggest accomplishment of my life is tricking this beautiful, wonderful person into sticking with me. So yeah, she's a long-suffering, very patient person. But I appreciate her so very much. I appreciate her so very much. And we dated for 5 years before we got married, so she knew what she was getting herself into. She knew she was. I always say that, like, the rule book for me is short as well, just like the games I love. And I said so, and I always say to her, like, there were no surprises, right? I mean, you knew what you were doing, and nothing's changed. And she said that. I think she said one time they've been the only pleasant surprises. So yeah, so I've probably gotten milder over time, which is probably a good thing. So.
I'd like to get back to productivity, and I think that ties into what we talked about earlier about games on one side and professional work on other. And I think that's something similar of a thing for creative people and order structure, and things are done with some methods or Pomodoro, for example, stuff like that. And I think that oftentimes people split structure and creative work, but they actually, I think, go well hand in hand.
They absolutely do. And that's, I think, something that, what's his name? Rick Rubin, he's a music producer for many years, produced everybody from, Johnny Cash to Dr. Dre, he wrote a beautiful book recently called The Creative Act. I think it's called The Creative Act. Highly recommended for everybody that's that works in creative stuff, writing, anything. He talks about that. He's like, those things seem like they are the opposite, but they are not. They absolutely are not. They, you really get a lot of value from being able to put structure into things. And this is, for me, the board games again. Most European style board games are about, I have too many choices and I need to decide which ones to do. So it's very much about measuring that opportunity cost, of like, pushing this forward versus pushing this forward. Which one of these things is going to get me more value? So I used to joke with people. I said, my job is resource management, and it's my hobby as well. But from a creative perspective, you should be doing this kind of stuff. Structure helps. Absolutely, planning helps. And some people will say, oh, I just want to write, and, I just, I want to, be inspired. And it's like, well, yeah, but I think Toni Morrison it's on one of the LWS mugs, actually. It's like, if I waited for inspiration, I wouldn't be a real writer. And that, I think, is one of those things. It's about saying, if you actually sit down on a regular basis and you say you're going to do this, if you spend the time to get something like Scrivener, structure what it is that you're going to do, think about it ahead of time, you're going to have an easier time of writing these things. One of the reasons that the novel I wrote, the BBS, I call it BBS, a like story. I don't think that's going to be the title, but I built that out in Scrivener beforehand, and I wrote this. It's going to be this. And so when I went down to actually write it, it was so much easier because I knew these were the story beats that I was going to go through in each part of this. This character was going to be introduced here. I didn't necessarily know how the specific lines they were going to say. Maybe once in a while there would be maybe a line that I already knew in my head. I was like, okay, yeah, that character is definitely going to say that. But that gave me this really, really structured, beautiful way to do this. And it really worked for me. And I honestly, I go back to when I was in college. My degree is actually in writing, specifically literature with a focus on creative writing from UC Santa Cruz. One of my teachers there was a wonderful gentleman named Jim Houston, who wrote a few novels. He's probably more famous for having co-written his wife's book called Farewell to Manzanar, which is a very popular book in like high schools, talking about, Japanese Japanese internment camps, not concentration camps, internment camps that were in the U.S. And when I was sitting down to write the novel that that would be kind of my thesis for my degree, I was like, I'm so intimidated by writing a novel. And he said, well, why don't you just write it as a series of stories? He said, just take it in this structure and say, this is this story. That's a series of connected stories, and do that. And so the first thing I wrote was actually, I think it's chapter 10 or 11 in my book. I wrote that as a separate story. And then that's what I did, is I compartmentalized every other chapter. I structured them out and wrote them like that. And I was able to write the book. I don't think it's a very good book. It was written a long, long time ago. And even though I've self-published it now just to get it kind of out of my way, I don't think I ever would have accomplished that if I hadn't had that really good advice from, one of my writing teachers saying, break it down, don't feel like you're trying to lift the weight of the world with writing a novel. Instead, focus on this. And so it really did help me, I think, a lot to be able to do that. And that became one of the ways in which I thought about creative writing in this kind of structured way. And, again, I'd go back to the same thing about work and, kind of the artistic life too. I've written product requirement documents for most of my professional life because I've produced software for Disney and lots of small companies. And I just made software products, and always have been the one to say, I'll go in and start writing. First I would like to write a manifesto. I'd like to say, what was the reason we're doing this? Who are the customers? What is the accomplishments? The things that we want to accomplish with this. And then I would write a product requirements document, which, in the old days at Disney, those were 300-page documents. Nowadays, you try to do something a little leaner, and a little bit more flexible. But still, you put down a statement of what you're planning on doing, you structure it. And I've approached all of my creative projects the exact same way. Like, let's just get down what I do have right now, and then develop it, and have a plan before you go into actually the writing process. I think it helps immensely. And there's a lot of tools out there that will help you with this. And I think there's also a lot of tools out there that will ease you into it. Like you don't need to make everything as structured as I do, carefully aligning every little thing in Scrivener, which I do think is a great product. But at least if you just get that basic structure down and understand where you're going to go, I don't know. I find it's a far more productive process for me after doing that kind of thing. And as I said, I think it draws from a lot of, ways in which I've accomplished things that were not necessarily just fun creative projects. Other things have been able to deliver, on the basis of that. And so for me, hey, if it's been successful over here, why not try to apply and see if those skills are transferable? I find quite often they are. So.
Yeah, that's interesting. Talk about basically bringing the method of writing a novel into writing technical documents or maybe articles that you publish. And it's basically the same. When you put it out like that, it sounds like the basis is the same.
It really is. I mean, you're still doing the same kind of, steps in the process. I mean, I certainly see novels sometimes that feel a little unfocused. And, maybe somebody used a different method. And if you're writing something that's meant to feel like stream of consciousness, then, maybe that's fine. I just don't know that I think people are going to enjoy the experience as much as if they feel like there is a 3-act sort of focus. There's, points at which they're going to be happy, where you're going to shift the motion. I mean, the best writers out there all talk about how, you're structuring, the shift in momentum and, the way you're going to look back and forth between, the dynamic of things kind of going up in one place, then starting to high, going down. There's just all kinds of ways in which you think about this from people like Robert McKee or, Save the Cat. Save the Cat is a good book, I think. Save the Cat Writes a Novel, I think, is a good book for me. The screenplay one, obviously, I did read, but I still don't think I'm ever going to write screenplays. I just don't think I can. I just don't think it's for me. I like my descriptions too much. But I think there's those. All of these books about that kind of writing can be very helpful. I've probably I've probably read, I don't know, dozens and dozens of books, and every one of them gives me something good. I still like to read new ones on the subject because people have good ideas, I think, all over the place, and I apply the good ones that I think work for me, and then the other ones, maybe they work well for other people, but I really love structure. I mean, it gives me a lot of pleasure to be able to do that. Everything other than maybe, I don't know. Right now, I have a new thing I've been writing on Medium. I call Piffle, which is just nonsense. I think is what Piffle would translate to, I guess. But I write these little short things about maybe a piece of media that I've enjoyed. I just published one on a really beautiful, wonderful TV series called Reservation Dogs, which is about indigenous peoples in the U.S. living on a reservation, and it's a group of teenagers, and I think it's really beautifully done. And so for me, that's about the only thing I don't structure right off the bat, is because it's a one-page. It's meant to be one page. I call them one-page stands. I always talk about being a creative philanderer, where I, cheat on my projects, and I don't feel so badly if I'm just having a one-page stand, because then it's just like I'm only doing one little thing, and then I'm going to go back to the main project. So these little ones, writing about that, or I wrote about Asteroid City, the latest Wes Anderson movie, which I love very much, and just writing a little piece about something to just get it out of my head is very pleasant. And then I go right back to my normal project and everything like that. So those I write without structure, but I end up, when I go through the editing process, I think I put a little bit on them, but I mean, unless it's something like that, it's structure, structure, structure. This may be why I don't write a lot of poetry, because I haven't figured out how to structure poetry yet. I'm sure there's there's structure in poetry that people enjoy, but I'm not really a poet. As I said, I'm a novelist. I'm a prose person, and I'm fine with that. I don't have any real interest in necessarily expanding into poetry or screenwriting or anything else. I got plenty of stories that I want to tell in the format that I feel best in. So.
Well, yeah, and I think that I talked to my previous guest, Jason Furman, about constraints and putting things in a box, because a lot of times people think about creativity as outside of the box, but actually when you work inside the box and with the constraints that the format gives you, some of the best stuff comes that way. And I think that's interesting when you both think about fiction and maybe articles in your one-page stands, and even in marketing when you need to write slick headline for something, or a tweet, or a short message. I think that really can dig up something that probably wouldn't be there if you had, let's say, 12 pages to write. And I think when you push that all aside, that can be really creative. And I think that's really fun. He did really a fun thing with his project. He wrote a short story a week. The project was called Worth 1,000 Words. And he basically took image, illustration, something like that inspired him, and set out to write a story that's exactly 1,000 words. So he couldn't go over or under. So that gave him a lot of time to practice with that exact same format.
Oh, absolutely. Totally agree with him. I agree with that idea. Creative restraints are, honestly, they're just helpful because it then gives you some barriers that you can hit upon once in a while. And that gives you I think a lot of times, inspiration for, well, gosh, how do I do this thing? Well, limiting myself to this number of words, or limiting myself to writing in the second person, or limiting myself to saying I'm going to make sure that one of these is out every single week, whatever it is, I think that's really powerful, because, frankly, even the once a week thing, you can ruin a story by over editing it. Eventually just, optimizing it to the nth degree, you can actually mess things up sometimes. And there's something very powerful about saying, I'm finally going to get this out there. I'm going to put it out. It may be you feel like it's sort of warts and all, but in the end, it may be some of the wooliness of what it is that you've written that actually is part of its power. I'm very fond of I'm paraphrasing, I'm sure, a quote that we got from LWS recently that was saying, whenever you worry about there's no audience for what it is, remember that somewhere out there's somebody with a wound that is exactly the shape of your writing. And I feel like that's when we do with creative restraints, we get the stuff out there faster. And we also, don't realize that maybe that's exactly what we needed to be able to make this an effective piece to have an impact on folks. If I wrote it as a novel, maybe they wouldn't have read it because it's too long. But if I kept it to this nice short story and it's 6 pages, they're actually going to see it, and then it's going to have that impact on them that they really needed. So I love that idea, and it also, I think, is just a really powerful way to encourage you to say, keep putting things out. Don't hold on to them forever. I mean, this horrible idea of everybody's got some brilliant novel that's in a desk drawer somewhere is just a terrible idea, that people aren't getting things out there into the world, because then people are then it's their own. I very much think that when an artist has put it out into the world, then it's kind of on its own, and it becomes the reader's. Because then the reader, finds what they can in it, finds the value that means meaningful to them. And I think that's the beauty of art, is that, yes, we create these things, but the reader, or the viewer, or, the whoever is consuming the art, they add something to it. And I think that's the power. That's how these things make a human connection. And when we overdo it in trying to perfect things, it's just a terrible idea. It's a terrible. I mean, I throw some shade on George R. R. Martin at the moment for that one. There's a great interview somewhere online. You can find it, with him talking to Stephen King, and him saying, "Oh, well, I can't go on to the next sentence until the previous one is perfect." And I thought, "Oh God, stop telling people that. That's the worst writing advice." Thankfully, Stephen King comes right in and goes like, "Or you could just write." It just knocks it down. Just come on, man. Put the book out. It's been 11 years or something like that since the last one came out. Just finish the series. Heaven help us.
And it's a great contrast between the two of them, where the King is like, yeah, I just sit down and don't get up until I write, I don't know, 2,000 words, and that's it.
Yeah.
That's my method.
Yeah, I know. It's powerful, and it's and what happens, he's got tons of books out. Some of them may not be the best books ever, but some of them are really amazing, and he's character development. It's a shame that I think it's a shame for him to get kind of thrown into just a horror genre, because he is actually a very good writer. And he does do, his characters, he can do beautiful character development. That's really powerful. And so, I mean, he deserves more credit, I think, than just being thought of as a genre writer or whatever. But I mean, again, his philosophy on this, his Art of Writing book is very good. Very, I think, essential reading, I think, for writers. And that strategy of just saying, yeah, he's going to sit down there, he's going to write it, he's going to keep on moving forward. Somebody with the skill level that he's got, of course, at this point in time, probably doesn't have to think about it too much. But for starting writers, it really is just I think a really, really good thing to just get down and sit down for that for the time, get your sort of, self in the seat and commit the time to it, because, there's just no other replacement for that. You can daydream all day, and you're never going to get it down on paper if you're not sitting down in some place where you can record it. So, and as I said, I'm hopeful that AI tools help people in that way. If you're afraid of the blank page, at least you can type in and go say, hey, this is what I'm interested in, give me a version of that, and it'll spit something out that you can then go turn into the thing that you want. So yeah, if AI gets us more great content actually written by humans, then fantastic. But I'm doubtful that for the time being that it's going to be very good. And not to get too data science geeky here, but we're already seeing that some of these large language models are starting to be worse over time because they take in too much. And that could be a problem. These could actually write worse because of the fact that they take in too much information, including a lot of bad writing. And so, you may end up finding that at some point in time, people say, well, forget large language models. I don't want to go use ChatGPT or Claude or one of these other ones. I would like to use, Hemingway GPT, which is just trained on really, really good novels, and who knows, maybe that'll be better at writing than a novel than the large language models. We are seeing what we call baby LMs, baby language models now start to happen, where they're a little more careful about what it is that they actually train on, and who knows, maybe those will get better. I just don't know. I'm mostly interested in finding ways so that we make sure that creative folks continue to get compensated for their work. I do think there's something that needs to be done there. I'm actually working on a business that would be protective of writers and creators to make sure that they're getting compensated when their content is being used by large language model training methodologies. And I do think we need to protect things because one of the AI folks that AI kind of commentators online I like to watch often says, remember that this is as bad as it will ever be. And, like in 5 years, how good will these things be? Will we be reading novels and we go, wow, this is pretty good? I don't know. That's a possibility. I would love to be able to say the human ingenuity and, the beauty that we're able to express is something you're only going to get from a real writer. But we have to remember that all the training that's happening is the AI taking beautiful, wonderful writing from human beings and turning it into some, like putting it into the blender and then coming out with something else, which is really not that different from you or me reading a bunch of novels and going, okay, well, I read these wonderful books by Vonnegut and Salinger and Michael Chabon and blah, 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 and Ann Tyler and Octavia Butler. And now I put out this great novel that feels like it has all those things in it. Well, how different is that than the AI tool doing something like that? So is it gonna change? I'm not sure. Is it gonna get better and better? Yeah, probably it will. I just think we need to figure out ways to be able to make sure that people are taken care of, because that's what we should be doing, is making sure people are cared for. Businesses less. I'm not worried about businesses. I'm worried about people. So that's what all my focus is these days, is any product I try to work on, how do we make sure people are cared for? Yeah, I think is kind of a common goal for me. So.
And I think that's a great goal. I think that day in and out, we're seeing a lot of stories of people basically screaming and shouting that the things that AI puts out are taken from them, and especially in visual arts, writing is some way off still. It's like a mishmash of all other things, but I think that it's especially visible in the visual arts and illustrations and things like that, where people are straight up plagiarized. And I read a great post on LinkedIn where somebody called it AI is basically 3 plagiarisms in a trench coat. So I think that so I think that can be tied into that as well. And sure, we need to be careful. And when you think about creating products that way, do you think that maybe that's the line that AI still can't quite get? Thinking about motivations and thinking about what people need, opposed to how work is done and the end result.
I think there's a lot. there's a lot to unpack there. I like to always think back to Isaac Asimov, who gave us the laws of robotics years ago, and then promptly wrote a bunch of stories about how those laws of robotics were insufficient. So what we really need to be, I think, thinking about is the industry needs standards that we need to be considering, and they need to be focused on human need. So we need to be saying, let's make sure that those artists, those illustrators have a way to be able to, continue to do what it is that they do. And if anything, we find ways to empower somebody with AI. So maybe there's an individual who is an artist, and if their content has been used by a large language model, they should be compensated by that. And my hope is that then that guy turns around and he says, okay, I can do the art, but I don't necessarily know how to write the story, so I could create maybe a graphic novel that I could be selling to people. Or I could be making a movie, down the line, and maybe I could use all of AI to be able to use my creative spark to be able to turn something, make something much bigger. And I don't have to have a studio involved, because I can do it all in, digital animation and use CGI. That's the beautiful version of the future of this, is that every individual person that's got a creative bent could be able to create interesting things that could be then consumable by folks. And with 8 billion people on the planet, you've got a certain number of them that are going to be interested in doing stuff. You've got another much larger number that doesn't necessarily, they aren't creators. I mean, you look at even like social media right now, the percentage of people that actually put out social media stuff versus the people that just doom scroll, consume, it's quite a gap between those people. So my hope is that creative folks still have enough control and ability with all these AI tools that they can do what it is that they want to do. But we need to make sure that that's protected. I do think that it's scary. I mean, you even see the beginning of it with in the U.S. right now. Marvel has a show called Secret Invasion, and the intro to the show was all created with AI. And it's been a little controversial. And they said, well, it kind of makes sense because of the nature of the show. I don't think that really checks out, to be honest. I think it was done as an experiment. But it's very ugly, but it also sort of works, I suppose, thematically with the show. That it has this kind of changing and shifting thing because it's about, like people with, aliens that change their faces and stuff. But I think that I could see why people have an issue with that, of saying if this is done by non-creative folks who basically just did, a description of like what they wanted. They wrote a text out description and then they got this, 2-minute, animation that they then used on the show. That feels weird, but it also feels like, okay, but you enabled those folks who did not have the skills to do this to create something. And so is it fair to them that we disallow them to be able to do something that isn't necessarily in their skill set using AI? At the same time, everything that was trained on whatever AI system, I don't know what they used, Llama or ChatGPT or Stable Diffusion or something like that. I don't know what they used, but whatever they used, just pay the people that are involved. It's going to raise the cost of AI because we're licensing, from people, but it also make sure that people are getting paid, and it actually levels the playing field a little bit of human created content versus AI created content, if indeed that cost is a little higher. And you're going to find some people that are going to say, gosh, I don't like the quality of what's actually there. I don't think that's up to the standards that you would see. And so my hope is that, in the near term, we level the playing field this way. But in the long term, built into the fact that these AI tools are happening is a legacy of going, well, great, if you trained on a bunch of Picasso stuff, if it's in the public domain now, that's fine. But if it's stuff that actually is still being, used by people that are alive or whose estates are still, collecting money from it or whatever it is, you have to pay those people. You have to pay into a system to be able to do that, so that they are getting paid every single time. And, we see this with Spotify. We see this with, Apple killed the Napster and LimeWire, all the stealing that was happening years ago, by just saying, let's actually make it so that it's 99 cents per song or whatever it is. So if we just make it a really easy way to say, great, if your tool is using any of these things, then here we go. You're going to have to pay these things out. If you're going to produce a song that, you say, I want a song that's like Beyonce or Taylor Swift or, whatever it is, or Sonic Youth, you have to pay a little bit of money to those folks, because obviously the LLM is using some of the elements of their work, so there's a direct way to see that. And there's an indirect way to see that, just saying, hey, if your LLM has used this stuff, because we have a record of it, we have a record of everything you've trained on, that should not be hard to be able to go grab back from these LLMs. I just think that there's a way to be able to find a happy medium and not have it be about lawsuits, because right now that's what's happening is creative folks are suing people all over. They're suing, ChatGPT, they're suing OpenAI, I should say. They're suing all these different companies, and who's gonna benefit from that? Probably mostly trial lawyers. So let's instead find a way to be able to make sure that the creative folks are getting taken care of. And the tech companies, yeah, they've got some money. It's okay. They'll be all right. Like Microsoft will be okay. Facebook will be okay if they have to pay a little money out there. They've been making money on media for a long, long time. Scraping all of everything that Google, has scraped, everything that Facebook has scraped from, the New York Times, the Washington Post, whatever, publications are out there. I think this time we need to be a little more careful about it. We need to make sure that the tech companies are actually paying for the content that they're getting access to. So.
Yeah, agreed. I mean, it's a complex topic, but I think that's the way to go, because if we just shut it all down, and as you said, a lot of creatives do great work with it, and as we see a rise of one-man shows, let's say, who made awesome games in the last couple of years, created shows, YouTube series, which are something that wasn't possible, let's say, 10 years ago, let alone 20 or 30. So I think there is really a benefit to that, as you say.
Absolutely. And we've seen this happen, I mean, just from everything from, the YouTube channels to Etsy to, the tools that are out there now to be able to give the creator an opportunity to be able to make money from what it is that they do without necessarily having to have agents, managers, studios, manufacturers involved. I mean, it's really powerful, and I'd like to see it go that direction to be able to help it, kind of raise up humanity, rather than it just being another thing where, it's consolidated in a bunch of billionaires at these tech companies that, we have to just hold them accountable, I think, because the income inequality is one of the fundamental problems I think we have in this world right now, and I think that so much value is locked up in the technologies that it's got to be unlocked. It's going to mean more innovation. It's going to mean more opportunity for people, I think.
For sure. And we've talked about games, and you mentioned your work for Disney. So I have to ask and go back in time. You've written for some games as well for them.
I did. You probably don't remember the Who Wants to Be a Millionaire TV show, which was very popular here in the U.S. and around the world, I guess, in some places.
Yeah, I actually watched it and played the game. So.
Okay, all right. So there you go. Okay, well, yeah. When I was at Disney, that was one of the big ones I did was the Who Wants to Be a Millionaire, which was an experience, because at the time. Well, one of the challenges Disney had was they just could never figure out whether or not they wanted to be in software. It was sort of feast or famine. And like it does now, a lot of Disney's, fortunes are tied to the success of the current movie or the intellectual property that's out there. So we would release a bunch of games related to the Toy Story movie, for example, when it came out, and that was very successful and, was a very popular movie. And then, we'd have the Pocahontas movie came out and we'd release stuff there and it wouldn't sell because that movie wasn't very popular. So it was challenging because they would go, oh, we should be vertical. We should be doing all this, everything in house and, everything from designing and developing and all the way down to QA and release. And then, again, a dud property like Pocahontas or Hunchback of Notre Dame was another one that came out that was not successful. And then they go, why are we doing this? We should be licensing this out to, to Sony or THQ or another company. And so they'd license everything out. And then like The Incredibles would come out or something like that. And they'd go, why are we licensing this out? We should be making more money. And they'd go back and they'd hire everybody back. And it was just a kind of a crazy situation. And so for me, I was in this little, cone of safety because Who Wants to Be a Millionaire was a huge hit. In fact, such a hit that, Disney kind of doubled down on it a little too much, and they were putting it on every night of the week. It was on, practically. And so we put the game out at the time, and it was fun. At first I worked with the folks that I think nowadays they're called Jackbox, but those days they were called Jellyvision. We worked with them, and eventually we sort of parted ways, and so I had to do all the creative work as well as the production. So. It was quite an experience writing jokes for Regis Philbin, who at the time was, was the host of the show, and he was the biggest star at Disney. So that was fun to get to see positive feedback from him, for some of the jokes I wrote and everything too, which was a good time. I really did love that. And then, I made some other creative projects. I made a Disney trivia game. I made a Disney's Magic Artist game, which is a 3D art game. Lots of fun, but also it was just I love that company very much. I grew up here in LA, and where I lived here in the San Gabriel Valley. I still live in this, relatively the same place, south of Pasadena. If you've ever heard of the Rose Parade, what they have on January 1st, I live just south of there, and our house backed up to the house of one of Disney's original animators. is a guy named Ward Kimball. Ward was most famous for creating Jiminy Cricket from the Pinocchio movie, but he also did, a lot of the characters. And Ward was like the troublemaker of the Disney of those. Disney called them the Nine Old Men, but Ward was like was the troublemaker, this guy actually had like a full size train in his backyard, and and also smaller trains and stuff like that. So like we would see him on Halloween. We'd go around trick or treating to his house, and you could kind of see some of the stuff and everything like that. So even as a young kid, I was sort of fascinated with Disney because we had this interesting little connection that we happened to live right near this guy. We didn't live in it was a very modest house, but his place was not so modest. It was just up, but it was on the other side of the wall. So I think I always had that connection, and so joining the company made sense to me. I loved what the company did. I loved the concept of quality. Disney is very much about quality entertainment. Spending the money. I mean, Walt Disney himself was, he went into hock. He spent all of his money trying to make stuff good. And thought that was how you get people to come to your movies, to come to your theme park, is you spend a lot of money and you make it really, really good. And I just love that idea. To me, that's it. Quality matters, time put into things matter. And I loved learning that as part of that company, because I feel like it affected everything else I've done in my life. I've always focused on saying I wanted to make things high quality. I believe that's the right way to entice people in, rather than, doing things cheaply, on the cheap, quickly. I appreciate the fact that the first 7 years of my kind of professional life was there, because I think it helped me develop that kind of thing. And also just marketing, a focus on marketing. I mean, everybody at Disney's in marketing. I mean, the janitors in marketing at Disney. So, I just always, even though I've been a product person, I've always also said, you create the value, but also you need to think about how does you communicate the value. And that helps me with, I think the writing too, because it's like, well, I understand my goals here. And I also understand, how it is that I'd like to be able to convey things effectively. So yeah, I that was a wonderful time. I loved working there. I loved, we were embedded with the Imagineers. With the folks that make the theme parks is what the Imagineers are. And so, because we were high tech, and I got to work with a lot of them there, and that was a magical experience. I do like theme parks. One of my magnum opus board game, which is not out yet, is a theme park management game, and it all came from the fact that I had worked at Disney. And one of the most interesting weeks of my life actually was Disney used to, I don't know if they have it anymore, but they used to have a class, internal class called the Disney Way, that gave you an opportunity to kind of get a survey of the company. And you got a week off from work, but it wasn't really a week off, because you were going into classes and you were learning about the company as a whole. And it was fascinating to me. We spent a couple of days at the studio, learned about, the film business. We spent a day at the Imagineering folks, which I kind of knew, but also I got to learn new things and meet some people I hadn't met before. And the last day was down at the theme parks, down at Disneyland here in Anaheim. And I actually got to be a character. So I got to dress up in one of the costumes, and also just learn a lot about theme park management. And I think that inspired me to want to create a game about the subject, which I didn't create until years later. But just that thought about, what are the interesting aspects of how it is that you drive crowds in different ways? How do you motivate people to stay in the lines by building a show in there? How you move audiences between spaces? All those I mean, maybe I'm just a geek about logistics and stuff too. Sometimes that's just fun. And I think it's one of those. Things that just inspires me too. A lot of times is to think about, the construction of a space like the theme parks, where there's forced perspective, where you're trying to take people out of their world and into a place where Walt's vision was you go there and it's carefree. You stop thinking about all the pressures of the world and you just spend time with your family and your friends and you enjoy yourself and you don't have the encroachment of the real world in there. And I think that's just a really interesting, powerful experience, and that they build, and they still do, I think, a beautiful job of doing, well, most of the time. And I love that that's still something that I think inspires me. Gosh, it's been 20 some odd years since I worked there, but I still feel it. I still feel it in every project that I do. So.
That's a great story, and I think that the game that you mentioned that you're working on, or is it done but you still haven't published, is it that sort of a dream project for you? You've worked on a lot of fun stuff, a lot of awesome stuff that we mentioned, but is that something that you've dreamed of making? Like you said, it's your magnum opus, but is it a project that you've dreamed of and haven't the chance to get out yet?
It's just a time commitment thing, I designed the game, 12 years ago originally. But then, what happens is game design continues to move. And so my challenge is there are so many board games out there. There's plenty here, but there's thousands and thousands of board games out there. And for me, unless I'm doing something new, I'm just really not that interested in releasing it out into the world. I've designed a couple of games that I've just mothballed because I thought, well, it doesn't really accomplish anything interesting. And so for me, as time has progressed and games have progressed as well, I thought about, well, okay, great. I'm going to bring this element into it because I quite like the idea of saying that it helps accomplish the goal. And that's the problem with having a project in gestation for so long, is that new things keep coming up, new ideas keep coming up. And it's then finding the committed time to be able to say, I have the design, the game is functional, it does play, but then I have to go play test it with people. So probably what I ultimately need to do is which is I think one of the ways a lot of designers move things forward, is I need to get a partner out there. I need to get a partner who's willing to help me with the play testing components of it and the development work. There's great game developers out there. I just haven't put that as a priority because right now I want to get these books out the door. And I always think back to there was a great article I read, I don't know, must have been about 2014, that was talking about Warren Buffett, the investor, and it was his I think the guy who had been his pilot for 10 years had said he was a 10-year anniversary of the guy working for him, and Warren Buffett said, "Gosh, I can't believe you still work for me." And the guy was like, "Oh my God, Warren Buffett's mad at me. He's going to fire me or whatever it is." And Buffett was like, "Oh, no. You have all these things you do. You always tell me about, like these projects you're working on." And I just would have thought one of those things, you would have gone and worked on one of those. And the guy's like, "Well, I'm a dabbler, blah, 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 blah." And I think Buffett said, "Well, okay, I'll tell you what, write down the 25 things in your life that you do, like every little thing that is a priority in your life." And so the guy did. And then he said, "Okay, now what are the 5 that are the most important? Like of that 25, what are the 5 most important?" And the guy put, like raising his kids and, the some personal project. He figured out 5 things that mattered the most. And then Buffett said, "Okay, here's your problem: is those 5 things should be the only things you do, and the other 20 should be your worst enemy." And it changed my life. It absolutely changed my life because I had always been a dabbler. I'd always been, somebody said, "Hey, come help me with this, come help me with that, whatever." And I would step in and I would take care of things. When I read that, I knew that there were things I prioritized, but I had always allowed for time to be able to work on like all these other projects. And thinking about those things as your worst enemy, as in, no, I will never touch those things, is very, very powerful. Now, I wish I could say that I'm extremely good at this. I'm still trying to effectively do that. There's still things that float up, and occasionally I'm like, okay, here you go. I spent an hour on that. All right, here you go. I spent an hour on that. But I'm a lot better than I used to be, and I really, really try to keep my focus on these 5 things, and I have not allowed that board game back onto the list until some of these books get off that list. So right now, I got a book on that list. I've got, one of the businesses I'm working with is very specifically on the list. My kids are still getting through college. One of my focuses is making sure that they have the support they need and that they can do what they want to. So that's a focus for me. I got the 5 things that really, really do matter the most, and I do spend the majority of my time on those things. But I think every time I get an email that says, "Hey, we've got this great new business thing. I would love if you could come in and be an advisor to blah, 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 blah," I'm starting to say no much more. And saying no is really, really important. And so, yeah, that I think is a key thing that everybody could benefit from, is more focus on, the things that really matter. And then, hey, you know what? When you knock one of those 5 things off the list, you get to bump up one of the other 20, and then really to focus some time on those things. And that's the way to get, I think, things accomplished.
Well, I think that's a great note to end on. That's really a great story, and I think that's a great message for anybody, whether they're trying to write something, create a game, or just figure out a way to live. I think those are the words to live by. So, Eric, thank you for stopping by. Thank you for being a guest of Storyline Sessions. And I wish you luck with your future endeavors, both books, games, the business, and everything in between.
Thank you so much, Marco. It was a great time.
Thank you for tuning in to another Storyline Sessions episode. I hope you enjoyed it as much as I did. You can find Eric on Twitter and Medium at Burgess. That's ERBURGESS, altogether lowercase. You can also find me and follow me on Instagram at Storyline Sessions, where I'm currently partaking in Alphabet Superset, a great project that I've discussed in the previous episode. If you're interested in topics of creative writing and telling stories in any kind of medium, keep following Storyline Sessions. There's a new episode coming every Thursday. This podcast is recorded using Riverside FM. It's a tool that I highly recommend, and if you'd like to try it out for yourself, you can find the link in the description that helps me out with a commission without any additional cost to you. My name is Marko Bogdanovic, and I'll see you next week. Keep creating stories.